I was asked to put forward a slightly different perspective because normally I've presented to you the governance arrangements, the professional standards part of it, and I think I've been put into quite a vulnerable position today. Some of this that I'm going to share with you is stuff that's evoked a lot of memories for me, so I did feel on my journey here today a little bit of a moment, okay? So with that in mind, it was what's it meant to me to be part of developing registers and particularly part of this programme. So it's from the heart. Is everybody comfortable with that? And I promise not to burst into floods of tears. And I've called my slide motivation, and that's really because what I've seen in the time that I've been working with you is a really great group of motivated people, and I've got a big slide at the end that covers all of the aspects that I think you've been talking about this morning, but which I've felt and I've seen and I've heard. Okay, so oops, next one. I think I've just gone the right way. Here we are. So one of the key things that I wanted to say to you is that in the role that I've got at the moment, the key thing for me is about being able to understand what values are really important to me in terms of what's got me to where I am today and what gets me up on a morning, if you like. And in what I do, I think having got to this point in my career, it's important that I'm seeing and feeling and hearing things about compassion, okay? That I've got a sense of accountability for what I do, so it's not a case of coming along and making false promises, things that can't be achieved, and that things are evidence-based, and that I know what's possible, what's not possible, and that I can share that. And that I respect the people that I'm working with, that I work with in my team in the academy, which is really small, so we're all pretty driven in what we do. And actually that there's a mutual thing about respect, a respect of why you've been looking at developing a directory, looking at why you've been developing a register, and potentially respect for what we're bringing. So we've had a bit of prior learning and we wanted to share that with you. But ultimately, what I felt has been most important in every role I've had and in everything I do is about how we engage, how we communicate, but literally how we have some interconnectivity to get forward, to move forward, to listen, to try to understand, and to make whatever changes are really important. And then the next thing really is, well, why is that important to me? Are those the sort of things that you would hold as important to you? Perhaps not in exactly the same sort of ways, the same sort of language, but is that speaking to you in some way about what you come to do when you come to work? So I was thinking about what was the greatest motivator in my career. And believe it or not, the woman in the nurse's hat is actually me, okay? But this is 40 years ago. And the lady sat next to me is a woman who's celebrating on that day her 100th birthday, called Lizzie Salmon. And in that day and age, there wasn't a shortage of nurses, actually. You had to compete for everything you were doing. People were worried about getting jobs. I know many of you in the room can't imagine a world like that, but that was the situation. And so consequently, there were other things going on as well, which have similarities. So for example, people were nursed in bed in pyjamas and nighties and things like that. And actually Lizzie came in and she said, you know, Janet, that's just not me. That's not who I am. And during the course of the time that I was able to care for her, which, because this was a rehab ward, I had a lot of opportunities to get to know her and for her to impart some of her wisdom. And for me, she gave me the greatest inspiration to want to go on in my career in healthcare. And I say that healthcare because it wasn't just in nursing. It was about the part that I could play in whatever role I was doing to improve the lot for people that I was looking after. And some of the roles I've had have been backroom roles, have been policies in the Department of Health, chief executive in an acute hospital. And believe me, I think holding hard to the things that you feel motivate you to get up in the morning mean you've got to look at everybody as being part of a team. And that's what struck me in coming to work with you guys was actually it didn't matter where I'd come from. or where I'd been, but I was actually here to share something that I knew about. And I felt it was well received, well argued in many cases, and I'd certainly say I earned my salary on the days that we had some very robust exchanges of views. But that's good, that's what it's about, but it's in a respectful way. Are you all with me so far?
Yeah.
A few nods around the room. Yes? Yes, good. So other things that I think are really important in my observations and things that I've felt in working with you, and I've worked with other groups, but I've not experienced it in the same way that I have with you guys, okay? And in no order of setting it down, but it's about co-development. So people have come forward, you've shared things today about how you felt, but it's actually about co-development. Nothing will change unless people listen and people move on. Sharing the work with Janice and Fiona, I've experienced a sense of professionalism that I don't think I've experienced with some of the other groups. About shared working, understanding some of the issues that you've been having, that you've talked to them, and about the need to do things in a different way. Above all, has been the sense of commitment. And you heard that from Christine as being something that's really important. And I've heard that in your presentations. Commitment to really make a difference, to make sure people recognise what the added value of having a group of people who can be identified and who can have a career path, but who are part of a team. Not instead of, but part of. And I think to be able to get to that point involves a lot of insight. And that isn't going to be when you get your register, that's going to take a lot of time. Does anybody know how long it took doctors, really medical doctors, to get to a point where they were actually properly recognised as a general medical register? No. Do you think it was like 10 years, 20 years, more than that? Any offers?
More than that.
More than that, yeah. So what you're trying to achieve and have achieved, probably in the last 18 months, is the start of a journey. Okay, so nothing happens overnight. What I would say is that I would hope that in, if I get to be Lizzie Salmon's age, that at that point in time, that everybody who works in healthcare is regulated in some form or other. Because that gives a sense of security, I think, to the population, to the public, and to members of the team, that there's a set of standards of education and training that you could expect of every colleague. And you only know that if you know that there's a process to go through. The other thing about behaviours that I think is really important, and where to me respect is really critical, there's no one size fits all. There's no one person that's ever going to be right. There'll be research evidence for some things, there'll be evidence bases and so on and so forth. But change is all about checking what the status quo is really doing. And I think that's what you've been tackling. It can be uncomfortable for some, and it can be really complex. And there's a bit of shuffling around until you get everything into shape. But just remember that you've got to work with one another on a day-to-day basis. So respect's important, and respecting where people are trying to get to. Leadership, I've seen in abundance. So when we've had the engagement events, and you've been putting forward perspectives, and you've taken things back into your work environment, I've seen real leadership. But I've seen that throughout your organisation and throughout the way that you operate. From people that I've worked with in NHR sponsor groups, chief executives, and so on and so forth. But it is the sense of belief that I think has been underpinning the drive and the commitment, and the idea about personal responsibility. So as Christine said, being on a voluntary register actually beholds people to really take into account what they're committing to. It isn't I can walk off tomorrow if I don't like what they're doing. You can. But actually the people who remain on the register endeavour to try to meet the standards and the professional updates on a regular basis and an annual basis, I think are showing a huge commitment to trying to deliver first-class care, first-class teamwork, wherever they're going. It has to be something that's wanted. And working with NIHR, we suggested that instead of jumping straight into the idea of having a register, that you work up through the idea of being a community of interest, a directory, and then if you've got the commitment behind that, then you're ready to go for a register. So that's one of the reasons you've gone through the process that you have. Because actually, it takes a lot of resilience to get to the point that you have, and a huge amount of enthusiasm. Okay, so I think what I've tried to do there is encapsulate most of the things that have been coming up in the conversations this morning, and things that you would see in any sort of transitional and change process. But about implementation, and here, you know, with all the storms that we're having, this should be familiar to many of you that live in rural areas, but if the root system isn't really good with any tree, it's not going to stick it out, it's not going to survive. And actually any tree is just a tree until you start to get the leaves and things start to show exactly what you've got. But you need to have some role models in all of that to help drive that forward. And in this room today, you will be the role models, the people who will be encouraging your colleagues to take this sort of thing on board. You'll see other role models, but that's really important. It's also important that role models can challenge the status quo, can have those sort of conversations with you in a respectful way. The other thing about implementing this is about developing the talent and skills from a group that I think have felt that they've been hidden for many, many years. And that's about working together, developing the register, looking at registrants and those involved in the development of the register to try to put that together. So it's important to understand the conviction, because the NHS is starting to recognise accredited registers. I think there's still got quite a way to go. And as I've said, one of my personal visions would be that everybody is regulated. And whether that comes as a system similar to credentialing in New Zealand, but some way of making sure everybody could be seen as being accountable for their learning. So what we've got to do is reinforce it. So what the challenge for you will be, as you take this forward, is about how you reinforce it in your role, but also helping to inform those that you work with in your organisation, that you can really make a difference by being recognised as a group of people who are committed to the work that they do, have a proper place in what they do, and are part of a team in delivering what they do. But above all, what I'd say to you is, in implementation, it's the care about thing. It's that care that I put up straight away, making sure that you've got your patient, whether you see them directly, whether you're part of a process that is helping them, put them first. Care about one another, because that's what makes where you work an attractive place to come and work, and where it will help your numbers in the health service and other areas start to increase if people see it as an attractive place to be, and where I think from a workforce perspective provides another opportunity for people who may not have considered a career in healthcare because they haven't wanted to go through a traditional sort of approach. And by traditional, it's the traditional routes that you're all aware of. And we have in the workforce plan that will be coming out eventually, got to look at things in a very different way. And I think what you've been through is an amazing organisational development change process. That's one of the things that the NHS should start to look at as an exemplar of how to use regulation, registration as a way of being able to do that. So I hope you've found that interesting, and I hope I haven't bared too much of my soul, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.